Ever feel like, the economy is kind of like a rigged game?
Yeah.
Like there's this elite group with a cheat code
Right.
and everyone else is like just struggling to, you know, make do
Yeah.
with whatever scraps are left.
Yeah.
That's the kind of unsettling image of an oligarchy, right?
It
A
is.
system where a small, powerful group calls the shots.
Exactly.
So today, we're diving into how the U.S. economy has been tilting in that direction for decades.
Right?
We're going to explore the policies that have kind of shifted the balance of power.
Yeah.
We'll unpack dense concepts like neoliberalism.
The mouthful.
I know, right?
Yeah.
We'll look at how tax cuts and union power play into the equation and see if globalization is the hero or the villain,
Right.
or maybe somewhere in between. Maybe.
Hey.
What's in it for you?
Good question.
Well, understanding these shifts is crucial for understanding your job security,
Yeah.
your influence as a voter,
That's a big one.
and ultimately
Yeah.
your shot at a fair shake.
Yeah. It's about understanding the underlying systems at play.
Right.
And yes, this deep dive gets into some pretty dense economic theory.
We do like to go deep.
We do.
Yeah.
But, it boils down to something very real, the distribution of power and wealth.
So first things first.
Yeah.
Let's define what we're dealing with.
Okay.
What exactly is an oligarchy?
Right.
Why should we even care?
So imagine a society
Okay.
where a handful of families control most of the land resources and political influence.
Okay.
That's a classic example of an oligarchy.
Got it.
Think ancient Rome,
Okay.
where a small group of wealthy patrician families held the reins of power.
Oh.
It's a system where the needs and interests of the few
Okay.
are prioritized over the many,
Right.
often leading to inequality, corruption, and instability.
So not a good look.
Not ideal, no.
And you're saying that the U.S. is showing some signs of this.
Well, the U.S. isn't ancient Rome.
Right.
Some argue that we're seeing similar patterns emerge in our modern economy and political landscape.
Okay, so not togas and chariots,
Or quite.
but maybe some echoes of that power imbalance.
Potentially.
That's a bit unnerving.
Yeah, something to pay attention to.
So how did we get here?
Well, it's a complex story.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
It always is.
But take us back to the 1970s.
Okay, back in the disco era.
Back to the disco era and this thing called neoliberalism.
Neoliberalism.
I know you've heard the term thrown around.
Oh, yeah. It's everywhere.
Right.
But what's the gist?
So neoliberalism essentially champions free markets deregulation
Okay.
and a hands-off approach from the government.
Okay, so less government, more free market.
Yeah, think less government regulation,
Okay.
more reliance on the invisible hand of the market.
So on the surface, it sounds like a recipe for freedom and opportunity.
Right, it does have that appeal.
Yeah, less red tape, more individual initiative.
Yeah.
What's not to love?
Right, but...
But I'm sensing a but here.
Well, while neoliberalism did spur economic growth in some areas,
Okay.
it's like a powerful medicine with some serious side effects.
I see.
It created conditions that allowed a select few to amass extraordinary wealth,
Yeah.
while others struggled to keep up.
Okay.
Think of it like a game,
Okay.
where the rules sound fair but subtly favor certain players from the start.
So it's not necessarily that neoliberalism was designed to create an oligarchy,
Right.
but it created fertile ground for one to take root.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it.
Okay.
It's all about unintended consequences.
Right.
Let's look at deregulation, for instance.
Wow.
Starting in the 1970s, there was this push to reduce government oversight across industries,
Okay.
like finance, airlines, and telecommunications.
Okay. So opening things up.
The idea was to let the market decide winners and losers.
Okay. So a level playing field.
That was the hope, but what happened?
Yeah. What did happen?
Instead of a level playing field, we saw a wave of mergers and acquisitions.
So instead of more competition, we got fewer bigger players calling the shots.
Exactly. Fewer players meant less competition and more power concentrated in the hands of a few.
Right.
And when it comes to finance, this can have massive ripple effects throughout the entire economy.
Yeah. Finance is a big one.
It is.
Yeah.
Take the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999.
Okay. I've heard of that.
This act, put in place after the Great Depression,
Right.
had separated commercial and investment banking activities to prevent excessive risk-taking.
Okay. Smart.
Its repeal is often cited as a contributing factor to the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, wow. So instead of preventing a crash, we took off the seatbelts.
That's one way to put it.
I see how that could lead to some serious instability.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with long-lasting consequences.
So deregulation allowed for these behemoths to form.
Right.
And then
Right.
were there other policies that added fuel to the fire?
There were a number of policy shifts during this period
Okay.
that contributed to the concentration of wealth and power.
What about tax cuts?
Ah, yes, tax cuts.
Wasn't there this whole trickle-down theory that cutting taxes for the wealthy would benefit everyone?
The trickle-down theory, the idea was that if you lower taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals,
Right.
they'll invest that money, create jobs, and everyone will prosper.
Sounds good in theory.
It does have a certain appeal.
But did it actually work that way?
Well, the data paints a different picture.
I have a feeling I know the answer.
Since the 1970s, the top marginal tax rate has been slashed repeatedly,
Right.
going from 70% down to 37%.
Oh, that's a big drop.
But instead of trickling down, a lot of that wealth seems to have stayed concentrated at the top.
So the gap just kept widening.
In fact, the share of wealth held by the top 1% has exploded during the same period.
So instead of a gentle rain, we got a flood at the top.
It's a striking trend.
That makes the whole trickle-down thing sound more like a myth than a sound economic policy.
It raises some serious questions about who benefits from these types of policies.
Right, because if the wealth is concentrated at the top, that means less is circulating throughout the rest of the economy.
Exactly. It has a ripple effect on the entire system.
So where does this leave the average worker?
That's a crucial question.
Didn't unions used to be a force to be reckoned with?
They were.
A way to balance the scales?
Unions played a vital role in securing fair wages, benefits, and working conditions for millions of Americans.
Okay.
But starting in the 1980s, union membership began a steep decline,
Oh,
coinciding with this rise of neoliberal policies.
interesting.
This decline was driven by a combination of factors,
Okay.
including anti-union legislation, the decline of manufacturing jobs, and a concerted effort by some to weaken organized labor.
So it's like one of those domino effects.
Yeah, you could say that.
Deregulation and tax cuts empower the wealthy,
Right.
who then have more leverage to push back against unions.
It creates a power imbalance.
It's a vicious cycle.
It certainly raises questions about the balance of power in our economy.
And this is where the conversation gets even more complex.
It does.
Because we have to consider the role of something called financialization.
Financialization. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful.
I'm already feeling a bit lost.
Okay, let me break it down.
Please.
Is this where Wall Street enters the picture?
You could say that.
Think of it this way. Instead of companies focusing on building better products
Okay.
or providing essential services,
Right.
the focus shifted to making money through complex financial transactions,
Okay.
often involving high-speed trading and exotic financial instruments.
Okay.
This created enormous wealth for a select few in the financial sector,
But
but,
I bet there's a catch.
well, there are always trade-offs.
It's never that simple, right?
Right. The problem with financialization is that it prioritizes short-term profits
Okay.
over long-term stability.
Huh.
It's all about making a quick buck,
Right.
even if it means taking on enormous risks.
Okay.
And guess who gets left holding the bag when those risks backfire?
Not the folks raking in billions on Wall Street, I'm guessing.
You guessed it, the average person is the one who feels the pain when the economy tanks, jobs disappear, and retirement savings vanish.
It's like a casino where the house always wins.
It's a system that can create winners and losers.
So we've got deregulation,
Uh-huh.
tax cuts that favor the wealthy,
Right.
weakened unions,
Yeah.
and this rise of financialization.
It's a complex mix of
It
factors.
sounds like a recipe for a system that's increasingly tilted in favor of the few.
It's a trend that many economists are concerned about.
But there's one more ingredient in this mix, right?
There's one more big piece of the puzzle.
Globalization. How does that fit in?
Globalization.
It's a word that gets thrown around a lot.
It does.
Is it the hero or the villain of this story?
It's more nuanced than that.
Okay, I figured.
On the one hand, globalization has connected markets,
Okay.
brought cheaper goods to consumers, and created new opportunities in developing countries.
That all sounds good.
But it's also been a major driver of job losses in developed economies like the U.S.
Okay.
as companies moved manufacturing overseas to take advantage of lower labor costs.
Right.
Millions of American workers found themselves out of work.
So cheaper stuff at Walmart, but at what cost?
It's a trade-off.
It sounds like globalization might have exacerbated this wealth gap we've been talking about.
It's a complex issue, and economists debate the exact impact of globalization on inequality.
So it's not a simple answer.
No, it's a multifaceted issue.
But it certainly played a role in reshaping the economic landscape and creating winners and losers.
It's been a transformative force.
Okay, so we've got this perfect storm of deregulation,
Right.
tax cuts favoring the wealthy, weakened unions,
Mm-hmm.
financialization, and the mixed bag of globalization.
That's a lot to unpack.
It all paints a pretty bleak picture.
It's a complex picture with both challenges and opportunities.
But here's the thing that really keeps me up at night.
Okay.
If this small group is amassing all this wealth and power, how are they using it to further rig the system in their favor?
That's the question, isn't it?
It's like they're playing a game where they get to write the rules.
That's where things get really interesting and a bit unsettling.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Because in a system like ours, money translates into political influence. And that's where we get into the murky world of campaign finance and lobbying.
Okay, buckle up, everyone. We're going deep into the belly of the beast.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
I have a feeling this is where things get really interesting.
We're about to dive into the mechanics of power.
Tell us more.
Well, it boils down to this. In the U.S., money plays an outsized role in politics.
Okay.
Wealthy individuals and corporations can pour vast sums into political campaigns,
Right.
shaping the narrative, influencing voters, and ultimately swaying the outcome of elections.
So it's not just about having a voice, it's about having a megaphone that can drown out everyone else.
It's about amplification.
Are there any specific examples of how this plays out?
Lonnie,
Okay, hit me.
think Citizens United.
Okay, the Supreme Court decision.
The 2010 Supreme Court decision that opened the floodgates for unlimited corporate spending in elections,
Wow.
or the rise of super PACs. These political action committees that can raise unlimited funds from wealthy donors.
Okay, so basically unlimited money in politics.
These developments have essentially created a system where a handful of billionaires can wield enormous influence over our political process.
So much for one person, one vote.
Right. It raises questions about the balance of power in our democracy.
It sounds like we're living in a system where some votes count a whole lot more than others.
It's a valid concern.
It's pretty disheartening.
It certainly raises questions about the state of our democracy.
So where do we go from here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and that's what we'll be exploring in the rest of this deep dive.
Okay, so stay tuned, folks.
We're about to dive into the stark reality of inequality, a political system that seems increasingly broken, and the erosion of trust in our institutions.
Okay, this is getting heavy.
Stay tuned, because this is where the rubber meets the road.
I'm buckled in. Let's do this.
Let's go.
Okay. So we've laid out how the game might be rigged, but how's that playing out in the real world?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Is this oligarchy thing just an academic debate?
Right.
Or are there actual consequences for everyday folks?
Yeah, for people like you and me and our listeners.
Right, exactly.
It's definitely more than an abstract debate.
Okay, good.
This shift in power has very real consequences.
Yeah.
And one of the most glaring is this widening gap
Okay.
of income inequality.
Right. We've all heard about it.
Yeah, it's something we hear a lot about.
But it's kind of hard to grasp
Right.
what it actually means.
Yeah. We're not just talking about the rich getting richer.
Okay.
We're talking about a system where the gains are so concentrated at the top that it's warping the very fabric of our society.
So paint a picture for us.
Okay.
Just how bad is it?
Right.
Give us the hard numbers
Okay.
that really bring this home.
Hold on tight,
Oh, yeah.
because these stats are pretty jarring.
Okay, I'm ready.
In the U.S. today, the top 1%
Okay.
has more wealth than the bottom 90% combined.
Whoa.
Let that sink in for a moment.
That's crazy.
We're talking about a tiny sliver of the population holding more wealth
Yeah.
than everyone else put together.
It's hard to even imagine.
And it's not just about assets.
Yep.
Income inequality has also skyrocketed. The top 1% has captured almost all of the income gains in recent decades,
Right.
while wages for the majority of Americans have remained stagnant.
So the gap is getting wider and wider.
It's a trend that's been going on for decades.
Wow, those numbers are hard to wrap your head around.
It's a sobering reality.
It's like this economic tug of war where one side has all the muscle
Right.
and the other is barely hanging on.
It's a real struggle for many people.
What does this level of inequality mean for the classic American dream?
Yeah.
The idea that anyone can climb the ladder
Yeah, right.
with hard work and determination.
That's the real tragedy of this situation.
Yeah, it's like that idea is slipping away.
This level of inequality creates a system where it's incredibly difficult for people to get ahead.
Right.
Imagine a race where some runners start miles ahead of others.
Oh yeah, that's a good analogy.
Sure, you can still run hard and try your best,
Yeah.
but the odds are stacked against you from the start.
So you're basically running uphill the whole way.
You're facing an uphill battle.
The American dream becomes more like a lottery, where the vast majority of people are playing with losing tickets.
It's a system that can create a sense of hopelessness,
Yeah, it's pretty bleak.
and that's a dangerous thing for any society.
So it's like the system itself is creating a barrier to upward mobility.
It's a complex issue with multiple factors at play.
And I imagine this has consequences
It does.
that go way beyond just the economy, right?
Absolutely.
Does this disparity fuel other societal problems?
Extreme inequality erodes trust in institutions,
Okay.
fuels social unrest, and can even undermine democracy itself.
Wow, that's serious.
When people feel like the system is rigged against them,
Yeah,
they lose faith in the political process
makes sense.
and become less likely to participate.
So they check out.
And that creates a dangerous cycle where the voices of the wealthy and powerful become even more dominant.
So it reinforces the existing power structure.
It's a vicious cycle.
And I think we're seeing that play out right now.
Yeah.
Look at the political landscape. We're more polarized than ever before.
It's a very divisive time.
Do you think this is just a coincidence?
I don't think so.
Or is it connected to this growing sense of inequality?
It's highly unlikely to be a coincidence.
Right.
As this chasm between the haves and the have-nots has grown,
Yeah.
so has the divide between different political groups.
Yeah, it feels like everyone's picking a side.
It's partly driven by economic anxiety,
Okay.
resentment, and a sense of being left behind.
Like people are feeling forgotten.
But it's also been fueled by calculated efforts to exploit these divisions for political gain.
So it's like someone is pouring gasoline on an already raging fire.
It's a dangerous dynamic.
And I can see how this polarization makes it even harder to find common ground
Exactly.
and address the very issues that are causing these divisions in the first place.
In a hyperpolarized environment, it becomes incredibly difficult
Yeah.
to have nuanced, constructive conversations about complex issues.
It's like everyone's just shouting at each other.
It's all about scoring points,
Yeah.
demonizing the other side,
Right.
and resorting to simplistic solutions.
It's like we've lost the ability to have a real conversation.
It's like trying to solve a complex equation by just screaming the answer louder.
We're so busy yelling at each other that we can't even agree on what the problem is,
Right.
let alone how to solve it.
It's a real challenge.
So we've got this extreme inequality, a political system that seems more fractured than ever, and a growing sense that the game is rigged.
It's a lot to grapple with.
It's not exactly a recipe for a healthy democracy, is it?
It's certainly a cause for concern.
So if we continue down this path, are we headed towards a full-blown oligarchy,
It's the million-dollar question.
where a small elite dictates the rules and everyone else just has to live with it?
Some experts argue that the U.S. is already well on its way to becoming an oligarchy,
Really?
while others believe that the situation isn't irreversible.
Okay, so there's still a chance to turn things around.
But one thing is clear: if we want to preserve our democracy and ensure a fairer future,
Yeah.
we need to tackle the issue of concentrated wealth and power head on.
Okay, I know we have to talk about solutions, but before we do,
Sure.
let's play devil's advocate for a moment.
Right.
I mean, not everyone buys into this narrative of oligarchic influence.
Right.
Some argue that technology, not policy choices, is the main driver of income inequality.
It's a valid point.
Others point to the overall benefits of globalization.
Globalization has had both positive and negative effects.
Are these valid points, or are they missing the bigger picture?
It's important to acknowledge that technology and globalization have played significant roles in shaping the economic landscape.
Okay.
It's true that technological advancements have automated certain jobs and created new opportunities in specialized fields, contributing to wage disparities. And globalization, as we discussed, has led to both cheaper goods for consumers and job losses in manufacturing.
So they're not entirely wrong,
Right.
but maybe they're not looking at the whole picture.
Exactly. The key point is that these forces, technology and globalization,
Yeah.
have been operating within a policy framework that has perhaps unintentionally tilted the playing field in favor of the wealthy and powerful.
Okay, so it's like the context matters.
Context is everything.
For example, tax policies, labor laws, and trade agreements have all influenced how the benefits and burdens of globalization are distributed.
Those policy choices have real-world consequences.
So it's not just about the forces themselves,
Right.
but about how we choose to manage and regulate them.
Precisely the choices we make as a society, the policies we enact, the regulations we enforce,
Yeah.
all have a profound impact on who benefits from these forces and who gets left behind.
So we have more agency than we might think.
We have the power to shape the system.
If we want a more equitable and just society, we need to reevaluate the rules of the game and make sure they serve the interests of the many, not just the few.
That's the goal.
That makes sense. It's like saying, hey, technology is a powerful tool,
Right.
but let's make sure it's being used to benefit everyone,
Exactly.
not just a select few.
It's about harnessing technology for the common good.
And the same goes for globalization. We can harness its benefits
Yeah.
while mitigating its negative impacts through thoughtful policies and regulations.
It's about finding the right balance.
It's not about rejecting progress,
Right.
but about shaping it in a way that creates a more just and sustainable world.
That's the vision.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture here.
It's a challenging situation.
We've seen how policy choices have created conditions ripe for oligarchic influence, leading to extreme inequality and a fractured political landscape.
It's a complex web of interconnected issues.
But before we descend into utter despair,
Right.
let's talk solutions.
Let's shift gears.
What could we do to turn the tide?
Yeah.
To steer away from this potential oligarchy and create a system that works for everyone?
It's a big question.
Is there hope?
Absolutely. There's always hope.
Okay, good. I need some of that.
The first step, as we've done today, is recognizing the problem
Okay.
and understanding its root causes.
Right. Awareness is key.
Once we have a clear picture of the challenges,
Yeah.
we can start exploring solutions.
Okay, so let's brainstorm.
And the good news is that there are many potential avenues for change,
Okay, that's good to hear.
and many of them have significant public support.
So people are ready for change.
There's a growing movement for reform.
Okay, so give us a roadmap. Where do we start?
Right.
What are the key areas we should be focusing on?
Let's dive into some concrete solutions that can help us address this concentration of power and create a more equitable society.
Okay, let's do it.
And remember, this isn't about punishing success or demonizing wealth.
Right.
It's about creating a system where everyone has a fair shot, a system where the rules of the game aren't tilted in favor of a select few.
Love that framing. So what are those solutions? Where do we even begin?
There are three major areas that deserve our attention: campaign finance reform, strengthening labor unions, and creating a more progressive tax system.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground,
Well,
from defining oligarchy
Yeah.
to unpacking all these policies that have kind of tilted the playing field.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And honestly, it can feel pretty overwhelming.
I get it.
But you're saying there's hope
There is.
that we can actually shift things
We can.
in a more equitable direction.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the doom and gloom.
Right. Easy to get discouraged.
Yeah, but remember, we humans are pretty good at problem solving.
At least I think so.
We've tackled huge challenges before, and we can do it again.
Okay.
It starts with recognizing the problem and understanding the levers of change.
So let's talk about those levers you mentioned: campaign finance reform, strengthening unions, and a more progressive tax system.
Yeah, those are some of the key areas.
Those sound like huge EE undertakings.
They are big challenges, no doubt.
If we had to pick one area to focus on,
Okay.
where would you say we could make the biggest impact? Where's the linchpin?
If I had to choose just one, it would be campaign finance reform.
Really?
It might sound wonky,
Kind of does.
but trust me, this is the heart of the matter.
Okay, I'm listening.
Why? Because the undue influence of money in politics is like a virus corrupting the system.
Okay, so it's like a disease.
Yeah, it allows wealthy individuals and corporations to essentially buy influence,
So they could just pay to get their way.
shaping the legislative agenda to benefit their interests, often at the expense of the public good.
Okay, so it's not just unfair.
Right.
It's actually hurting everyone.
It undermines the whole system.
So it's like trying to play a fair game when your opponent owns the casino.
Exactly.
They control the rules, the odds, everything.
It's a rigged game.
And it's not just about fairness.
Right.
It's about effectiveness.
Exactly.
Until we reduce the power of money in politics, it'll be incredibly difficult to make meaningful progress.
Yeah, it's like hitting a wall.
On any of the other issues we've discussed, whether it's inequality, climate change, healthcare, you name it.
It all comes back to this fundamental issue.
Okay, I'm convinced campaign finance reform is the key. But how do we actually make that happen? It feels like such a huge, entrenched problem.
It's a big challenge.
Where do we even begin?
Remember those problem-solving skills we talked about?
Yeah, hopefully we haven't lost them.
Let's put them to work. There are a number of concrete steps we can take.
Okay, give us the rundown.
First, we need to tackle the issue of unlimited corporate spending in elections, which was amplified by the Citizens United Supreme Court decision.
Right, that was a big one.
This might require a constitutional amendment or a Supreme Court ruling that revisits that precedent.
Okay, so that's a heavy lift, but essential if we want to level the playing field.
Yeah.
What else can we do?
We need to push for stricter campaign finance laws at all levels of government. Think limiting individual contributions, banning corporate donations altogether, and requiring more transparency in campaign spending.
Okay, so less money from special interests, more power to the people.
Exactly. It's about shifting the balance of power.
Makes sense to me. But even if we achieve all that,
Yeah.
there's still the issue of lobbying, right?
Lobbying's a tough one.
How do we stop corporations from using their wealth to influence lawmakers behind closed doors?
It's a tricky issue because it's protected by the First Amendment's right to petition the government.
Right? The right to free speech.
But we can definitely make the process more transparent and accountable.
Okay, so more sunshine on those backroom deals.
Exactly, shining a light on those activities.
This could involve things like requiring lobbyists to register and disclose their activities, banning gifts and favors to lawmakers, and creating stronger conflict of interest rules.
It's about creating a system with more integrity.
So shining a light on those backroom deals and making it harder for special interests to pull the strings.
It's about making the system work for the people.
I like it. It's about bringing things out in the open.
Yeah.
Feels like we've got a long road ahead.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
But I also feel a glimmer of hope, knowing that there are things we can do
There are always things we can do.
to create a more level playing field.
It starts with believing that change is possible.
That's a powerful message. So to our listeners, I want to say this. Don't get overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem. Focus on what you can do.
Yeah, what can you do to make a difference?
Educate yourself.
Yeah.
Support organizations that are fighting for change. Contact your elected officials, and most importantly, vote. Your voice matters.
And remember, even small actions, when multiplied across millions of people, can create a ripple effect that leads to real, lasting change. Never underestimate your power to make a difference.
That's a perfect note to end on. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We've explored some challenging territory, but ultimately I think it's a message of hope. We have the power to shape a better future, but it starts with understanding the problem, getting engaged, and never giving up the fight for a more just and equitable world.
Keep asking questions, stay curious, and remember you're not alone in this fight.
And that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better tomorrow.